Hey everyone, we are in week 5 of our series of How to Be Married, and we had a special guest.
Special guest?
I
Really?
don't know.
Wow.
I don't know. The renowned Pastor Lee Martin.
Man, Renee, this is getting better.
I know. Talked about our words and how we use our words in our relationship with our spouse.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump right in.
Love it.
We've been starting kind of in the same place every week in this text, Ephesians chapter 5. And so did you receive the assignment? Hey, this is your week.
Yeah, except
talk about
at first
words.
I thought it was like going to be something different. I didn't know it was words.
Oh, okay.
Because I wasn't in that first meeting when we were kind of lining it out. It just said sanctification and not words. And so I was like, where am I going to go with that? But then just a couple weeks before, it was like words. Okay. And that actually felt better to me. I mean, I could talk about sanctification, but words seemed a little clearer for me. So just a couple weeks before, I knew that's what we were talking about.
Okay, so how was it? Even just like in your preparation of writing the sermon this week, how did it go?
Well, I was joking with somebody that at Church on the Move, we have this blessing and curse of having all these great communicators. So when we get together and talk about the message, there's so many good ideas, so much good content. So the challenge for me is I'm not a very good editor. Whit's a really good editor. I'm not a good editor. I'm like, well, I don't want to not say that. I don't want to not say that. Seth, Ethan, like, this is also good. How do I cram all this into a message? And when I got done writing the initial draft, it was 17 pages long.
Wow.
Do
you know what your word count was?
Normal sermon's like 7 or 8.
Oh, wow.
And so
this is a mini book that you
yes.
wrote.
And so I'm like, how am I going to cut this down? So that was the biggest challenge. It wasn't a lack of content. It was like, how do I, 1, edit down what I really feel like I'm supposed to say, and 2, how do I get it to fit together? Because I care a lot about transitions and all that kind of stuff in my message. And so those take a little bit of time. Yeah. So like getting it down and then being able to put it together, that was the challenge.
Just for the sake of talking about craft for a second, I'm curious. So how do you write a sermon like you? Like you're talking about 17 pages. That's never happened to me in my life.
So it's because I learned manuscript. Yeah. But I've kind of which would just mean like writing every word out. Mm-hmm. And I do like to word craft. I like to think about the way sentences come out. So but
and I could hear that because I went to the Saturday and the Sunday 10.
Yes.
And I could hear real similarity. I mean, I end up saying things the same way. I think sometimes we have a pattern of speech, but
you're so much like your style is so different though because you just got 0 notes up there, which I admire tremendously because I've never done that way.
Well, I'm watching you use your iPad, and I'm like, I wonder how he's using this and how I can see you moving so seamlessly back and forth between what's on your page and what or on your screen. And then what you're saying, that's why I don't have notes is because I can't do that.
Yeah, well, it's from years of doing it that way. So it turns into kind of a manuscript / outline where I'll just, if I'm telling stories or whatever, I feel really comfortable off my notes for that.
But do you write those down, like how you're going to say them?
No, not like the story about being in the 5th grade and going to the skating thing. I've written that more in my head, and I know what parts of it I like, especially the humorous, like the timing parts of that. So I'm going to repeat those, kind of some of that word for word, but I don't necessarily write that out manuscript. If you were to see my notes, it just says Justin Lester's birthday party, whatever. But there are other paragraphs that I definitely have sentences that I want to say it a certain way.
And I watch you say it like I'm watching you, look down at your screen and you're reading that and then looking up and you're back and forth between it. But I know that that's what you're doing is like that you want to say it a certain way. That's why that's there like that.
And I used to just go, why can't I just memorize all of it and not have my notes? And then I realized for me, there was something about I'm okay with going, hey, I wrote this way this week, and I kind of want to make sure I say it this way to you, to the people that are hearing me. So I kind of quit thinking I'm never going to grow up and be able to just do it without the notes. But that's how I felt, because I admired so much pastors would just get up there with nothing, no podium, no nothing, and they're just taught for 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Like, how do they do that?
I remember hearing Bill Hybels speak for the first time from a distance. I mean, I didn't see him. I hadn't watched him. This was 25 plus years ago, and hearing him speak, and I just remember being arrested. He's a great communicator, and but his tone. I remember thinking, this man is on the verge of tears.
Yeah.
This whole time.
Yeah.
He sounded so passionate about what he was saying.
Yeah.
And then I finally, I'd heard several sermons, and I really, was admired his speaking gift. And then I saw him speak.
Yeah.
And he stands there.
Yeah.
And he's turning pages, probably 40 or 50 pages, and he's reading the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I had no clue. That blew me away that someone could do that. So it taught me that that it's not really, and you do this so well, like whenever you're reading from your iPad, it still sounds like if I was just listening to you, I would have no clue that you were reading it.
Good.
I feel like if I was doing it, that's where, I'm not as good that way. That's not my gift.
Well, you're really good at what you do. And like if you were to see my notes, they're very color coded. And that has to do with not so much that I want to put different things in different colors, though there is some of that. It's that when I leave my iPad and I come back, I got to be able to find my place.
Yeah,
I used to be in a sermon group when I lived in Omaha with other pastors, and this one guy, he was a legit manuscript sermon where if you saw his sermon, it looked like a book.
Yeah.
It was paragraph after paragraph of just
amazing,
like a book. And I was like, I can't do that. I'd never be able to find my place again. So I break it into sections so that when I've been talking about, a girl making fun of me at a skating rink and I come back to the iPad, I got to be able to find where I was.
That's why. So when I first heard about the idea of manuscripting, writing it all out word for word, that one, I'd seen my dad's notes and I knew like that was not how he did it. And I was like, I have no idea what that's even like to write something out word for word. I wouldn't even know. And then I tried it, but and then I'm like, what do I take up here? Like what am I going to do? I mean, this is back in probably when I'm teaching at 180, like 25 years ago, or maybe not that long, but yeah. And so that was the problem is I couldn't look away because if I came back, I'd be like, I have no idea
and
where I'm
at. And then you're standing there in front of a bunch of people like, oh, hold on a second. I don't want to do that. Of course, your dad, he's got his legal pad up there with all of his notes. That's amazing. I've seen some of those notes. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Really
what's interesting is everybody just kind of finds their own way.
Yeah.
You have to sort of allow for that, to let people... I think it's good to put different methods before people, and then you find kind of what works for your mind and your personality. And I tried, 7 or 8 different iterations of how to speak before I finally kind of figured out this is how I like to do it.
Yeah.
And it took a long time. Yeah.
Yeah, it works. And just to get back to your question, because we're probably not supposed to just sit here and talk about preaching.
I
think one of the things that you and I are similar on is I never feel like the sermon has really fully come together until you've done it once, or at least, really not feeling great about it until like maybe an hour before.
Really?
So I'm talking to production. I'm like, this could change. These slides could change. This outline could change. And even though I've got all that content for me, and I don't like this about my process. I don't know if it's a problem with me or just the way God speaks to me, but it's just like, I know, is this really coming together? Is this really? And then about I'll be here on campus knowing that I got to be at rehearsal in 30 minutes. And that's about when I go, okay, I think it's ready. I wish so bad on Thursday I could feel that way. Like I want on Thursday to be like, it's ready. Slide it, aside and go enjoy a few days before the weekend. And I just have so much trouble doing that.
Yeah, I think it is. I think preaching in some ways it's both a spiritual and a creative process. And you're trying to what I don't want to do is get so into the weeds of the creative side of it that I neglect the spiritual side, and I've done that before lots of times. But then I don't want to get so deep into the spiritual side that I just I'm just going to go where the Spirit leads. There's some preparation and some I guess art that's required. Like you are thinking through. I don't want to call it a performance, but there's a part of it that you are delivering this. Yeah. And in that sense, I don't know what I think I know what a sermon's going to be before I give it to some degree, but there's always an element of the unknown. Yeah. Every time I walk out there, it's like on Saturday night, I'm like, I think I know how this is going to go, but we're going to find out together. And I'm going to get to the end of this and go, okay, either I'm going to go, that was a good sermon, like I know, like I feel good about it, or I'm going to go, that didn't make sense in some parts, or I'm going to have to rearrange some things because it didn't land the way that I wanted to, or whatever. And it's pretty much, I don't know that I've ever had it happen where I've come away from Saturday and had to completely, I don't go back to ground zero, but I, adjust some things to kind of, because you just sort of get to know it. In that sense, it's kind of like meeting a child. I obviously can't speak to birthing a child, but the process of, there is some kind of, you live with these ideas for days, these thoughts, these verses, you're trying to, and so you think and then there's the process of sort of putting it all together, but you don't really know until you get there, at least for me. Maybe there's some people that do, but I don't.
Yeah.
My dad didn't. I know that much. You come out of Saturday night and you're just like, with my dad on Saturday, there are a lot of times where he'd walk off and be like, that was terrible. And, and people would be, man, that was great job, but you just feel terrible about it.
Yeah. To get us back closer to words, I'll just make one more point on this. I did that Saturday night. I don't know if you noticed, but one of my points completely changed. I thought it was a clever point to say, make sure that your words live.
Oh, yeah.
And I used that because I was thinking of James 2, faith without works is dead. I was like, you can say something, and if it's not backed up, then it's dead. I thought this is a clever point. Make sure your words live. After Saturday, I was like, that point doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Don't stop speaking empty words.
I
thought that was better.
Yeah, because I was just like, people... when I'm preparing, I'm like, James 2, your words ought to not be dead. That's what I was thinking.
Did you reference James 2?
Yeah,
he
did.
Okay.
I didn't remember it.
You know what's interesting is, and it's this thing called the curse of knowledge. I forget the authors that wrote about this. We had one of them come years ago to a conference we did. But it's this idea that you don't know, once you know something, you don't know what it's like to not know it anymore. Yeah. You can't even think of what it's like to not know it anymore. Because that familiarity, it's like locked in your brain. And that's a real struggle in preaching. Yeah. Because there are the moments, the creative process, it's interesting. When you're studying out a passage, there will be moments of illumination, revelation, excitement, things that hit you or hit us. When we're preparing this, it's like, that's good. I want to share that. By time I get to Saturday and Sunday, it's old news to me. And so you can easily feel like this is doing nothing. Everybody knows all this. This has no bearing on anyone's life. Everyone's sitting there like, come on, I've learned all this like in second grade. What are you talking about? Yeah. And because you lose sight of, this is actually really hitting people, and that's a hard thing.
Yeah, it is.
It is.
And that's why I don't know if you both do this in your preaching, but I try when I'm in the preparation process and the writing process to keep thinking of specific people in our church.
Yeah, I definitely do.
That are at different places in their spiritual journey, different demographics, and go, okay, is this going to make any sense to this person that I know? Is this going to, and if I don't discipline myself to do that, I'm just thinking about how I feel about the text, or based on the knowledge that I have of walking with Jesus for decades, and not thinking, oh, this won't. And that's what that phrase, I was like, this phrase doesn't make any sense. Just say, stop speaking empty words. Like that makes way more sense.
Very direct.
Yeah.
For me, I like concepts. And so it's hard for me I have to really work to relate it back to people. So it's easy for me to talk about ideas and then kind of drift away into the abstract world. Yeah. And I like philosophy like that. So, but you have to, if you're preaching, you're bringing that down to the ground where people live. And that's hard work.
What I love about this conversation is we're like talking about everyone's communication style, and it is kind of a microcosm of words. Like, we're taking precious care of our words. We're being thoughtful about them, how we're going to arrange them. Right. And this is on a large scale, but I mean, we could take all of this and do it in a one-on-one conversation. Right. This didn't make sense to them. I should change this part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way I felt about both the topic of words and of marriage. I feel like I've had a lot of experience with words and with marriage in my life.
Yeah.
I've made a living from speaking words for most of my life. and I've had some really significant ups and downs in my marriage. And so I come to this not feeling like an expert. I come to it knowing that, like, while I know a lot about marriage, I've still got so much, and there's plenty in my past to say you have not done well at marriage. Same way with words. When I think about words, I love to deal in words, but if I have an issue, it's that I use too many words. Whether it's in my family or whether it's writing a 17-page sermon before I can, like, I have trouble narrowing it down, boiling it down, pruning it down, because I hate to get rid of good things.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I can talk about words, but not from a place of I've figured out words. I can talk about marriage but not from a place of I've figured out marriage. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's part of being a pastor or a communicator, to say I'm in the process of God also refining me and teaching me and showing me what I have to change, improve, be sanctified in some of these areas. But that I feel like I had several people say, "Oh yeah, I'm really glad you're speaking in the marriage series," just because of like mine and Shannon's story of being through some serious ups and downs in marriage. I'm like, I don't know if that makes me the right person to talk about marriage or not the right person. And I'm not insecure about any of that. I love talking about it. But yeah, you're right. It's just like all of it is. We're all in a process of understanding both of these concepts, marriage and then words within marriage. So anyway.
So you kind of just alluded to this, that you work with a lot of married couples. So it's not just you're up there preaching a message on a weekend and let me help you from afar, but you've been in it with a lot of married people.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the correlation between those kind of up close and personal conversations and how you see the importance of words in marriage when you're talking to people?
Yeah, so I think even some of the impetus of us doing this marriage series now was that we were looking around and going, man, marriage in general marriages are struggling right now. And maybe, that's been the case for a long time, but it seems obvious now. And then even within our church, we were just seeing that there were marriages within our church, people that we thought were in a good spot that maybe just weren't in a very good spot. And how do we not kind of, as Jesus would say, kind of end up on this broad road that's leading us a place that we don't want to go, and get back on a narrow road, a vision of marriage, I think. And so out of that, which this series has been fantastic, it's just been phenomenal. It's been really helpful for a lot of people as well. But I would say maybe to go back to that point that I changed the words on, or that I changed the words, that I changed the verbiage on, is one of the most painful things that I see in marriage is filled with a lot of promises. It starts out with promises. And then in order to keep our spouse happy, we make promises. And when things are going wrong, that's kind of our go-to to say, well, I'll change it and it'll be different and I won't do that again. And I would say maybe nothing, at least in the top 3 things that do damage in a marriage over time, are the misuse of words.
Yeah.
Promises that are not fulfilled. And whether that's promises of faithfulness that aren't fulfilled, or just I hear you and I'm going to adjust because I love you, and then it doesn't happen. And so often I'm sitting with couples and it's that they're just hopeless because they're like, we've been here before.
So is that, Lee, kind of like people defaulting back or going back to default positions and behavior? So like I think we all have a sort of way of operating, being, doing in the world that's probably correlates with your personality, your preferences, the way you were raised, a lot of things. Like you were saying, I'm not, I don't like to throw things out or whatever, or lose good ideas and whatever. That's the, use Myers-Briggs language, that's the ENFP in you, I would imagine. You just, you like, a lot of things. Yeah. Heather's that way too. And so... yeah, I'm not going to stop you no matter what gets said. Yeah. That's not going to change. I can't keep you from being that. Do you feel like that what ends up happening is there's conflict, but then we make vows of change, but we just kind of drift back to our sort of default settings? Is that what you're seeing?
And I'm going to be hard on men because I work mostly with men, and I don't think this is just true of men. But I think men have typically, this is a trap or a temptation that I see husbands fall into, is they can be selfish.
Yeah.
And they kind of want to do what they want to do. And over time, that creates resentment, loneliness, emptiness in their wife. And then they get in trouble. And there's negative consequences for that selfishness. And so they close the gap. And words are the tools that we have in our marriage. They're not the only tools, but they're the tools that we have. So with words, they make promises of change and different. And I know I did that, and I'm not going to do it as much anymore. And it's all an attempt to get out of trouble. And I don't mean that facetiously. I just mean like I know I'm in trouble, and I want to do something about it. And so this is what I'm going to do about it. And they do make some changes, but exactly what you're saying, Whit. I think what happens is the promise was made or the change was made to get out of trouble, to stop the pain of the consequence of that. And once they're out of trouble and everything's okay and we seem like we're fine, it is that slow drift back to
so you haven't really changed.
Right.
Yeah. So what's the solution? What should somebody do as an alternative to making empty promises?
Well, that's where I was trying to go at the end of the message. And I didn't close it out quite as much as the way I wanted to. I never quite dialed that in. But it's Jesus saying, both in Matthew and in Luke, that unless something changes inside, all this stuff that you say, even the stuff you temporarily do, it's not gonna last. Because it's coming from a particular treasury, and if that treasury, Jesus says, is bad, evil's going to come out of it. And if it's good, so one of the things that Shannon and I say to couples all the time is, I can't tell you how many times there may be no couple that is going through marriage problems that I haven't said to the husband and to the wife to a certain extent, this is a situation that you're going to have to get right with Jesus before you get right with your spouse. Like you can immediately start working on your relationship with your wife or your husband, but I don't have much hope that that's going to take you where you want to go. And that was totally mine and Shannon's story.
Wow.
Like we were at the worst place possible where we were just barely hanging on. And the thing that made the difference was Shannon started going to a counselor on her own. And I was just at the absolute bottom, and I was just as desperate as I'd ever been just for Jesus' rescue, for his help. And so my focus was completely on just, I need Jesus. I've got to have him. It wasn't, maybe this is not a good thing, it wasn't completely on Shannon. It was like, I need, like, my life is done. And so my focus was on Jesus. She goes to this counselor, and this counselor says, we can talk about Lee if you want to, but I'd rather just talk about you. What are you doing? What's the trajectory that you're on with Jesus? Because this may work out and it may not work out. Who are you going to be? And that was the absolute best thing that could have happened. And once we became more fully surrendered to Jesus, and we had loved Jesus our whole life, but I mean, like, fully surrendered. No other, burn all the other ships. This is, you are our only hope, Jesus. It was amazing how, we all know this, but how all of a sudden we could start working on the things that we needed to work on because we weren't there yet, but we were becoming the people that we were meant to become. So, that's what I would say. Like, and I think I had this line in the message. Maybe communication isn't our biggest problem. Maybe our heart is our biggest problem. And if we start making that place healthy with Jesus, then we can start speaking words of life. We can start speaking words of healing. And I mean, you may want to get into this, but the concept that I loved most out of this, and it was actually from our conversation in the content meeting, was it's easy for us to see how we hurt our spouse. I don't think anybody is in there going, I never say anything that hurts her feelings. We all know that. And so it would be easy to go, I ought to do better so I stop hurting my spouse. That's easy to think about, but that's a pretty small vision. The vision that I loved that comes right out of Ephesians 5 is this idea of I get to be a part of the process. And you talked about it last week in the glory section. Yeah. I get to be a part of the process of this person becoming the best version of themselves. That's a completely different vision than just, I probably shouldn't hurt her feelings.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's like I get I get to participate. I think it was the quote from, it wasn't Ortland. It might have been that Ingleson guy. That like we get to be a part of Jesus' redemptive
it's in there.
process in our spouse's life. Now that's a vision for marriage that's much more compelling.
So I don't want to lose this because I think this might be the most important thing that we talk about all day. What you were just talking about, and I think is the part that for Christian people is really, really hard for us to understand, especially if you already consider yourself to be, I'm using air quotes here, saved. For a lot of us, we just kind of put that settled, done, don't need to think about that anymore. I need to work on this here between me and my wife, whatever. And I was reading this week Keller's book, Center Church. It's kind of a pretty deep ecclesiology, a study of the church, his perspective of it, all that kind of stuff. And it's lots of reasons why I'm reading this. Anyways, there's a section on, I want to say the gospel, several sections on the gospel at the beginning. And this is a quote I ran into, and I want to read this because this is what I think we're talking about. He says, personal gospel renewal means the gospel doctrines of sin and grace are actually experienced, not just known intellectually. I want to highlight this idea. Personal gospel renewal, or to put it into Church on the Move terms, meeting the real Jesus. I was reading this and I thought of an acquaintance in my life where this is happening to. I think this is happening. And I sent him a text and I said, hey, is this a description of what's been going on in you? And he just sent me back a one-word response, exactly. Personal gospel renewal means the gospel doctrines. This is someone that's been saved their whole life. That these doctrines of sin and grace are actually experienced, not just known intellectually. This personal renewal includes an awareness and conviction of one's own sin and alienation from God, and comes from seeing in ourselves deeper layers of self-justification, unbelief, and self-righteousness that we may have than we have ever seen before. There is a new commensurate grasp of the wonder of forgiveness and grace as we shed these attitudes and practices and rest in Christ alone for salvation. Perhaps we have previously said that we were, quote, resting in Christ's work, not our own work for salvation. But when we experience gospel renewal, we have a new clarity about what this means in our mind and a new experience of actually doing it with our heart. And it's this idea of like, and I think Gary Brashears talks about this. Maybe you could remember. I wasn't in the class. Chris mentioned it to me. Pete Scazzaro certainly talks about it. Conversions. I think we think of ourselves as being converted to Christ only one time. Yeah. That happened, and maybe you've got it written down in a Bible somewhere, and there's a date.
Right.
But the real it's being saved. I am being saved. Does that mean there's never like any time where I sort of cross over a particular line of faith? No. But I think that happens. And for me, this is why when I talk about my real Jesus experience, it's been very hard for me over the years to determine whether or not I was even saved before it. Because it felt like such a new experience to me of God's grace at work in my life that it fundamentally changed who I was, like being born again. Yeah. And I think that can happen and needs to happen for a lot of people. I think what we're trying to do is fix something that seems broken, when in reality what needs to happen is you need to encounter Jesus again at a level that you have not yet. That's how real change happens. Yeah. Real change is not hearing a set of commands. Do this, now do this, now do this. Don't talk like that anymore. Don't say those words anymore. Some of you listening to this, that may have been how you received this weekend's sermon, and to which I would say, it's not going to hurt you exactly, but it also isn't going to help you in the way that you'd hoped. Right. Because you're still you underneath it all. And unless you unless you're wrecked by the love of God, that's what happens. When you encounter Jesus, it's like, I just don't even know how to describe it. It's like your whole world has changed.
Right.
In a moment, you realize everything has to be different from here on forward. That's why he says it's like being born again. Yeah. And if that hasn't happened to you, I think my advice would be to get really diligent about seeking it and saying, okay, Lord, I want this more than anything. Because I think until that happens, you're just going to still be the same old you, trying really hard to not be who you used to be. Yeah. And you'll always kind of fall back into the same patterns of behavior.
Yeah. I was talking to someone that we all know and love well. And I was sharing a similar story with them about like that experience for me. And because
did it happen well after you were saved?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah,
and
me
I
too.
Think, and I think that so not Gary Breshears, but my professor right now, he talks about how God, he sometimes we encounter these, what he calls desolations, these hard experiences, and we're wondering, where's God in all of this? And the felt sense of his absence is actually indicating that he's closer than we realize he is. And the invitation that he's offering us is to essentially crack open our souls and to allow him to get into the places where we have unknowingly said, okay, you're Lord and Savior, but I'm still God over here.
Yeah, right.
And I don't want you to mess with this part of me, because there's probably pain around it. There's probably some kind of so something that happened, and we're like, I need to self-protect, and all kinds of protection measures come out of that, whatever they are, whether they're excuses or their sinful behavior.
Or whether it's self-righteousness. In my case, I just think I'm fine.
Yeah, or just like a sense of superiority or inferiority, whichever end of the spectrum you land on. Right. And you are not entrusting the entirety of yourself to the inspection and the instruction of the Holy Spirit, because it's profoundly vulnerable. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we don't want to do that. We want to make empty promises, and we want to try, and we want to say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to work on that. Yeah. And then somebody works on it, or they leave a sermon like they heard from you, and they say, you know what, I need to do better with my words. And they say, I'm going to try really hard. And then 6 months later, they hear another sermon and they say, man, you know what? I'm going to try really hard. The first time they said it, they were sincere. Yeah. The second time they say it, they're frustrated. And then they hear it again 6 months later. They say, I'm going to try. And then they wonder, is this really working? Yeah, that's despair. I'm hearing, yes, it's despair. Sure. I'm hearing what you're saying that I need to do, and I see everybody else doing it, or so I think. Right. And I'm failing at it miserably.
Yeah, I mean, the gospel affects your behavior, but your behavior is a downstream outflow of your heart, which is what you were saying. Yes. That's what Jesus is getting at. Yeah. That if the heart doesn't change, the behavior is just an offspring of the heart. And so the way, for me, that's why in this whole series, my hope has been that we've not just had heard what you need to do better, right, yeah, but rather that works in conjunction with, now let me show you how Jesus has done this for you, and hopefully in a way that you've seen him. That's why it's just been my prayer: see Jesus through this, because then that. To me, when you really see him as he is, you can't help but be arrested, stopped in your tracks, overwhelmed with kind of wonder and awe. And that's what starts to change a person. I mean, and that's what's, even for me, I mean, this isn't a one-time thing. Even after you've said, I've had a real Jesus experience or personal gospel renewal, whatever phrase you want to use, that it's like, okay, that happened in 2012, and I can just move on now. But that even in Heather and I's relationship, my desire to, and even my willingness, and right now what we're sort of working through, even just in the season of our marriage that we're in, is I have to be connected to Christ first.
Yeah.
That's the motivation that's where I'm getting my motivation and the power for serving her, because it doesn't, as I said the week before, it doesn't produce a one-to-one result. It's not like I'm nice or I'm kind or I'm patient and then I get a response back that's commensurate to what I just gave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what sustains me through that is this deeper motive that is not just pragmatic. Because pragmatism, ultimately, there's this years ago. I think I've told this story before. Elliot was, what was he? He was angry with someone. I want to say in our home, someone, probably Lucy or something. He was mad, and I was talking to him, and I was like, "Listen." I think I said something like "soft answers turns away wrath," something like this. And he just looked at me so honestly, and he was like, "Yeah, but that doesn't work."
Right. I remember you telling that story. It's a powerful story.
I think that's how a lot of us. That's ultimately, without maybe saying that, that's the conclusion that we come to. Is like, okay, I tried. Yeah. I tried. I was nice for a few days, but it hasn't resulted in what I'd hoped for. She's still this. He's still that. This isn't working. I quit. And I think, so if the change isn't coming from a deeper place that's like, no, regardless of what all's going on out here,
right?
I'm this. I'm living this because this is how God in Christ has treated me.
Yeah,
you have no chance. Is the way I see it.
Yeah,
it's going to be very hard.
That's such a key feature to some of the counseling that we do as well. Is that there's a situation of some friends of ours that they're in a difficult season of their marriage, and they're not sure if they're going to make it. And I'm really proud of the husband. He's really the one more to blame, but he's really leaning in and doing the things that I've told him he should do. And he's in counseling, and he's connected in community, and he's honoring everything that she's asked him to do. And to have the conversation that says, regardless of what the outcome is, maybe you lose her.
Yeah.
But you still have to go on this journey with Jesus. There's stuff in you that he still wants to.
You know what's fascinating about that, Leah? Maybe that's a way of understanding some of what Jesus is meaning when he says, whatever it is, what is it? It's he who is, basically it's the line of, not willing to leave father or mother. I just read this a couple of weeks ago. Father or mother, wife, or husband, for my sake of the gospel. It's not worthy of me.
Right.
In other words, there is this call away from all other allegiances to Christ. That if I'm not, and I think that's where I truly think that's where. I mean, a lot of people. That's why they show up at church. Quite frankly, we're here because our marriage is a wreck. We need Jesus.
Yeah.
Yes. But also, what happens if the journey with Jesus looks like let go of that relationship and come follow me? I mean, but that was not the reason I came. I came for this relationship. I need you to heal this.
Right.
And so when he's not offering that, at least initially, it doesn't seem like that's where this is going directly. Yeah. It's a strong tendency to hit the eject button at that point because I'm not getting what I want out of this.
Yeah.
How would you say?
Yeah, go ahead.
That I think that's really interesting, and I'm thinking about it in terms of like a call to like come and die and allow your marriage to following Jesus. And I'm thinking about the process of crucifixion and resurrection, and your version of marriage, giving that over to Jesus and saying, you know what, whatever that's of me in this that you need to kill, that I need to allow to die, I entrust to you. And I believe that on the other side, whatever you do with it is going to be far better, and you can bring new life, you can resurrect it, but I have to hand it over to you.
Yeah.
Would you say that is true of your relationship, like your marriage, your own marriage, and in other marriages that you've seen?
100%. Like as Whit was talking, that fires me up because I know for a fact, I don't think, that God laid in front of me the defining question of my entire life on the top of a mountain in Colorado.
Yeah.
And it was around this. And the more I've pondered it, I was at the lowest point of my life, thought I was going to lose my marriage. I'd lost my job. I'd lost everything. I was empty. I tried so hard for like 3 years to fix it all, to fix my marriage, to fix my issues. Like I had tried that. Nothing was working. I knew I was sincere. I knew I was genuine. I was trying really, really hard.
Yeah.
I have this encounter with God on the mountain. He doesn't speak to me in an audible voice, but I know this is the question that he lays before me. And I have thought so much about this. This is the question for, I think, anybody, and it's exactly what you're talking about. He said, if I don't fix your marriage, if you don't ever have another job that has any purpose, if you struggle, if you have to love her and she never loves you back, all this stuff that I didn't want to happen, that I wanted him to fix.
Yeah.
And he said, if you don't get all of that, but you still have me, will that be enough for you? Now, the reason this is the defining question of my life is because that's a hard question to answer.
It really is.
Yeah.
I look back on it now and go, everything was in the balance in that very moment. Because I think, especially those of us who grow up in the church in a pretty great country with a lot of freedom and a lot of comfort, it's like walking with God has a lot of benefits. You know, God's going to help me in my marriage. He's going to help me be prosperous. What if all that was stripped away and you just had him because he's the holy God, creator of the universe, redeemed me. I am his, bought me with a price. If that was it, is that enough? And I think if people really wrestle with that question, I don't think any of us are like, absolutely, that's how spiritual I am. It's like, man, do I really see him that way?
Yeah.
And that can be such an incredible game changer in your life if you can wrestle with that question. What do I really believe about God? What do I really believe about Jesus? And so I started using this phrase. It's not original to me, but I started just saying, God, you are the reward. You are the reward.
Yeah.
Not a good marriage is the reward to me living well and not sinning. Not like prosperity in my bank account is the reward. Like you yourself are my reward. And I mean, I'm not saying I get up every morning and I'm completely centered on that idea, but I try to keep returning to that idea. I'm not just going, God, I'm praying here so that I can get this stuff, which is what you're saying. Like,
and it's
I'm here at church so that this marriage can get better, so my kids will be okay, so that I'll get that raise at my job. And I think God wants us to have those things.
But it's the trouble is we try to sneak, and it's the deceitfulness of the human. I was just reading, strangely, Jeremiah 17 yesterday, that the human heart is deceitful. Yeah, deceitfully wicked or something like this. And I thought about that. That word deceitful, it fools you. There's an old phrase, you may have heard it before, Jesus plus anything ruins everything. And I think what happens is we try to sneak in. We don't even realize we're doing it. It's I want to serve Jesus. That doesn't even seem like it's up for discussion. But I also need these other things to go along. And it's not that what he's saying to you is, I just want to be enough for you. Let all that other stuff go. Where we don't need it. Let's not even think about it. I'm not going to address it. I don't care. Matthew 6 tells us your heavenly Father knows you need these things. You have need of them all, I think is the phrase. And but the idea is priority. It is giving God priority over all to the point that you're willing to say, all right, if you're asking me to let go of all that, I will. Because I trust you, believing that he's good. I don't think it's can you let go of everything just because I want to take everything away from you just to prove a point. But rather to release things just to let, and I think we so quickly, or I think we so easily want to bring into our relationship with Jesus. This is why it's so hard for us, because for a lot of us, it's not, the other stuff in our lives isn't really threatened. It's only when that stuff comes under threat do you realize how badly you want it and need it. And I think what he's asking for is, give me everything, trust me, with everything. And in a sense, in your mind sometimes, and maybe even sometimes going further, it does require a literal death. I hope that doesn't happen. But it could.
It does sometimes.
Yeah.
It does.
It does.
There's no promise.
I want to chase this rabbit for just a second, if that's okay, because I'd like you guys' opinion, because you started this with what you read.
Yeah.
Where I hurt for people, maybe some of the people that are listening or watching this, is that they've lived a really admirable life.
Yeah.
They came to Christ, maybe young, maybe they had great parents. I did that took them to church, and they heard the gospel and they accepted it, and then they oriented their life roughly around that. They made choices that weren't destructive. That's kind of the path I was on for like 30 years, and I thought I was like good.
Right.
And then it took, for me, I'm not saying it should be this way for anybody. In fact, I don't think this is what God intends it to be. But my real Jesus experience was what I've described. It was this massive crash of losing almost everything, having to come to Jesus in the most desperate way possible, and in doing so, really seeing what I hadn't up to that point been able to fully see. And it's what you were saying at the first, like to see your own sin and to know what Christ has done for you. And where I hurt for people is kind of maybe looking back at myself before all that happened, going, I don't know how I would have gotten there. Like how do you guys? Because I'm trying to figure out with people, like, how do they get to that place of, like, really, that real Jesus if life is good?
So I read Blaine's... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was thinking about C.S. Lewis's quote about being far too easily pleased.
Yeah.
And how we can't conceive of what is meant by a holiday at the sea when we're like playing with mud pies. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we have mud pies and we cannot conceive of the beauty and the grandeur of what God actually has for us on the other side of giving up our little kingdom for his. And so it requires a supernatural, like it requires God to move towards us in the person of Jesus, in the work of the Spirit, for us to be open to that transcendent reality. Yeah. And I know that, how does it happen? I was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about how our generation, they suggested that we've inoculated ourselves to the gospel. Yeah. And we've gotten just enough gospel to be
I think it's a problem.
Unaffected by, immune to it. That's the word I was looking for. Immune to it. And it hasn't seeped into it.
It's a really dangerous place to be.
Yeah, but the gospel is infectious. Yeah. And so how do we become those people who are...
So what I was thinking of when you were talking about that, Lee, is I read Blaine's book. So for those that don't know, Blaine Bartel was my youth pastor, kind of mentor, to some degree older brother in ministry, worked here, had a total double life, sex addiction for years, devastated his family, has now, on kind of the other side of recovery, dedicated his life to helping men, particularly men in ministry, who are struggling with sexual sin and addiction, to be free of it. It's quite an epidemic. And but I read his book. I read it in one sitting. It just was it took me maybe an hour or two to read it through. And when I got done with it, I was just so profoundly affected by it. Just hearing his story, probably, one, he's a great writer, but two, just being close enough to the situation. I knew it was wild to see all that was kind of happening there, filling in details of a timeline of my life that I could remember. But I went into work, I think the next day or a couple days later, I was meeting with part of our team. And this is what kind of stood out to me, as I just said, the Lord breaks all of us. For Blaine, he had a church, he had a ministry, he was known, and it took his life coming to a complete end and his family breaking apart for him to hit the very bottom So it's what I was saying is, the Lord breaks all of us. That's what I said. Pray for a gentle breaking.
Yeah.
But I think you can't avoid being broken.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, I do think that's part of what communion is there. It's like, what happens to Christ does happen to you. You're not the same. You're not, we're not offering ourselves for sin before God, trying to get him to accept us. But in some sense, you will be broken. Yeah. I mean, that is what is the crucify himself? It is this idea of being, take up your cross. It is this idea of being broken so that you can be whole. And I think that, yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, the unfortunate reality is we're so confident and maybe unwilling to give up our mud pies that we just think we've kind of got this whole thing sort of worked out. And it does take, I can tell you in the situation that I was just referring to with the acquaintance that I just referenced, it does take a certain brokenness, like something has to happen. It'll either be marriage crisis can precipitate it, some kind of sickness can do it, some health issue, a loss of job, something to do with one of your kids. Yeah. I'm not saying God is plaguing you. I'm saying that in those circumstances, it might be the only chance that he gets to really get your attention, because otherwise you've just felt self-sufficient this whole time. And it does take a coming to the end of yourself, which is not what I'm sure anybody listening to this wants to hear. Right. That's why I go back. I was had a couple of someone I was talking to this weekend that was telling me they've been reading, they read How to Stay Married. And I do want to recommend that book again. And I want to recommend it in a way that it's like, listen, to all of you Christians out there, it has cussing in it.
It does.
And multiple times. And you're going to be like, wait a minute, what? I thought this was a Christian. It's not. It's just a book written by someone who is a Christian. That might be hard for some of you to see when you go through it. But truly, stay with it. It's worth it.
Very candid.
Yeah.
Very candid. Probably says the words you think sometimes, but he says them. But I think that there's something in that that story of complete brokenness.
Yeah.
It doesn't. The beauty of what has come out of that is is directly connected to the ashes of what was burnt down.
Right.
And it is. I mean, Jesus is like, he's not unclear about it. He does talk about fire and how and the New Testament often talks about just what remains is what gets to carry on. Yeah. You hear that around unshakable kingdom. You hear that in 1 Peter, I want to say, where he's talking about a furnace and your faith being tried by fire and all this kind of thing. It's like, I mean, I think we just don't even want to think that that's real or that would apply to us, that we're doing pretty good. But it does often take that.
Yeah.
So my seminary professor, he was he was primarily in this theology space, and he started kind of working with this other group of people around like spiritual direction and spiritual formation and things like that. And his boss said, "I'm sending you on a 3-week silent retreat." And he's like, "I don't know why I need to do this.
It's a long
why would
retreat.
you do
3 weeks of silence?"
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a spiritual director there that's going to meet with him every day. And if you don't know what a spiritual director is, it's just somebody who's there to notice with you, like what God might be up to. And so he's meeting with this guy, and he's there for a while, and he's like, I don't know why I'm here. He's talking to the Lord, and he's praying, and he's, doing all the right things. And then one day, he just cracks, and all this anger and like frustration starts to spill out of him. He was intellectualizing, like he was like, theology is my baby. I love this, but I don't have anything going on. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not, and he goes and he gets quiet, and he starts talking to this guy, and he starts journaling honestly, like just like everything that's coming out of him, his prayers. And he takes it to his spiritual director who's meeting with him. And he goes, "Oh, I see here you have this F word written over and over again." He goes, "John, I think this is your holy language." Because it's honest.
Finally,
it's coming from it's coming from this place of I'm angry, and I'm finally ready to be honest with with God about how I'm feeling. But anyway, so for anyone struggling with the F word and
Casey,
how to be married,
you
it's
got
there.
something you want to confess? Or
No, I don't like that word.
yeah.
But anyway, okay, let's get back on track.
Okay, let's do it.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. I've
good so far.
loved this conversation so far.
There is one thing that I wanted to play around with and talk about, because I think Whit and I are very opposite in that one point about speaking the truth in love. And I just was curious to talk about that in marriage, because in Whit's marriage, he's more like my wife and I'm more like Heather.
Yeah.
And my problem, and I'm just going to say this on a podcast, but a counselor and a good friend of mine years ago, and I think I've told you both this, but guy I love that knows me pretty well, and we were talking in a counseling session, and he just looked at me with so much tenderness, and he said, Lee, sometimes you're kind of a compassionate liar. And what he meant was like, I so don't want to hurt people, and I want to maintain the harmony and the close connection in the relationship. I mean, it's like what you guys were talking about last week.
Is that in your top 5 strengths, the
no,
harmony?
Harmony's not my top 5, but I mean, clearly it's high for me. I don't know why it doesn't score up there, but I just want, for me, it's about like, it's about relationship, but it's also about influence. Like, I want to maintain this healthy relationship with everybody because I feel like there's an advantage to that for a lot of different reasons. And so you guys talked about it last week, where I'm very aware of that space between me and the other person, right?
Yeah.
And he said, because of that, you don't always tell people what they really need to hear. You don't always tell people the truth. And I was like, man, as a person who values my integrity, for somebody that loves me and knows me to say, you're kind of a compassionate liar, like, oh, that hit me hard. Those are words that, like I said in the message, those haven't gotten out of my head.
Yeah. That's so good.
I think Shannon's a little bit like this as well. They value the truth and calling the balls and strikes accurately, that you don't have that struggle that I do. And I think you would know that sometimes that's hard. That's bracing for people that are like me. And I just think, I'm sure in most marriages, you tend to have, there are some where personality is exactly the same, but most marriages, there's levels of thinker and feeler and that kind of stuff, just to use that language. But I'm having to learn that I have hurt people. There's a person on our staff, I won't say who it is, but there's a person on our staff that used to work for me that she told me, she was like, I knew you loved me, but I wasn't 100% sure you had my back because you kind of took everyone's side. And I needed you in that one situation to stick up for me against someone else. And I wasn't sure that you'd do it. And that bothered me a lot. I've thought about that a ton.
Wow.
I don't want to be mushy because I'm compassionate.
Yeah.
I still want to have an edge. You know what I mean by that? I still want to be
I think so.
Distinctive, substantive, and not just
That's a good
mushy. And anyway, I just thought truth and love in a marriage. I mean, I know you probably have a lot to say about that.
I think I think the thing I'm learning is that you don't see things as clearly as you think you do. Mm-hmm. There's a real warning from Jesus in that. Mm-hmm. Take the speck out of or the log out of your own eye before you go try to take the speck out of your brother's. I think a big part of that looks like slowing down. Mm-hmm. Self-examination first, a lot of those things. So I think number one, you don't see as clearly as you think. Number two, it's not your job to fix everybody around you. Mm-hmm. And I think that the thing about people like me and Shannon and others, and there's plenty of us in the world, that we see stuff that we see as that on the surface or at first glance seems wrong. Either you, one, don't have all the facts. Two, it might just not be your job to fix. Maybe the person doesn't need you to tell them always. Sometimes speaking the truth in love is necessary. What I've found is just I need to be much slower about it than I have been. So it's the slow to speak, slow to anger thing. But I think I need to slow down. And what I've found is that when I listen and ask questions, often people self-correct. especially folks in kind of more wired up, like the two of you, Heather's in your kind of category as well, or sort of a bit more to your preference, feeler, which is just, again, we use that language, and it doesn't mean someone who's driven by emotions all the time. I'm using Myers-Briggs language, but it's, I guess what I would say is it requires, and Lindsay and I talked at length about this last week, so if you want to know more about it, you should go back and listen to that. But it's needing some kind of safety, a safe place to be able to kind of bring, I talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Some of us have, like, my feelings and my thoughts are just right there, cocked, loaded, ready to share. I'll just tell you. And others, it's a little harder to bring out into the open, and especially vulnerable things. And so there has to be some safety there for that to happen. And what I've found is that me coming in with critiquing questions, even when I think I'm being clever, this is one, even when I think I'm masking it in, a certain question or whatever, and it's not motivated by genuine curiosity and care and concern for them, they can sniff it out. They know that it's just like, what are you getting at here? They can feel that it's judgment still. And what I find interesting about the Lord's leading and love and care for us through the scriptures and experientially is that he often leads with, interacts with us in questions, curious questions that when you have to think about them for a while, and the best thing for it, I want to say, I'm trying to think of a book. I know this showed up in a book and I can't think of which one it is, but doesn't matter. When you're sitting down with a counselor, you have to imagine, think about this. That's all they do. They see people like you and me every day. And I would bet you money that all of us fall into, there's some categories. I bet you most of the time they're like, okay, that's this. They probably know it pretty early in the counseling session. But what they don't do, because they've been trained not to do, is to go, all right, hold up. This is your problem. Let me just say your relationship with your mother is causing you to whatever. They can see through it.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, immediately. It's not like they're trying to. It's not the problem is not that they don't see it. The problem is that you don't see it.
That's good.
I think it was Brene Brown. That's it. I had read a Brene Brown book years ago. And if you don't, and so it was like, it's not enough for, I think she talks about a counselor in the book that's like, the counselor clearly sees it, but until she has, and in fact, the counselor one time had told her and she was like, no, I don't do that. No, that's not it. And then I want to say it was like a couple years later.
Wow.
She was in the kitchen. I think it had to do with cereal, something like that. It's kind of starting to come back to me. It dawns on her, oh my gosh, she was right. And it's like it finally hit her. But it doesn't affect, the change doesn't happen until you admit it for yourself. So I'm saying all of that to say, me and my brilliance and my wisdom and my perfect observations, right, that I think that I have, in knowing what's going on in your heart. Even if I'm right, it doesn't do you any good.
Right.
Even if I do know, even if I have the perfect read on you and I can see what you're doing wrong, it doesn't do you any good unless you're seeing it. And so that's where I think curiosity, patience, thinking, I'm working on this right now, truly, of just trying to slow down enough to just let Heather talk. You said it this weekend, not finishing her sentences. Oh, I'm so terrible at that. And I'm not, because it's like, I know what you're saying. Okay. And I know this is what you need to do.
Right.
And or whatever. Or part of me is just like, okay, you can move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
I know where you're at.
And I'm
Keep going.
guilty of that with Shannon too. Yeah, I am.
Yeah, I had an interaction with Matt just this weekend where I could feel something, and I was trying to interpret what was going on. And so I was like, well, I think you're mad about this. And and he is like, well, actually, no, I'm mad about this other thing that is completely unrelated to what you're talking about right now. But
now I'm mad about that too.
No, he actually wasn't mad about it. It led to some really healthy conversation.
But you jumped the gun.
I totally jumped the gun. I was just trying to read his mind.
But if anybody's going to jump the gun, it's going to be your spouse, because they know you so well. Like
Yeah.
they not
What do they
only
think you
know
do?
Yeah.
well, yeah, but
Yeah.
they've seen your patterns. They know the way you think.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where we almost feel more of a license to do that kind of thing, but it's just not helpful. I think what you just said is going to be, I hope, practically helpful for a lot of people. But
Yeah.
I'll just say from this side, what I have to work on are 2 ways that I don't fully tell the truth. And I don't mean to, but one is not telling Shannon completely truthfully how I'm feeling, because I tend to go, I'm fine. I can deal with it. If I say all of that, it's going to make the conversation go another hour. It's going to make her not feel very good. I'll just not say it and just absorb it. What's the big deal? And in doing so, she's my wife. She's me. There's no one who should know more intimately what I feel about something, especially something about our family, than her. But yet I'll tend to just go, well, for the sake of what's easy, who cares? And I just won't tell
Would you say,
it.
though, this is what I'm learning.
Yeah.
So I just this weekend had a little bit of conversation with Heather about some things that I was feeling. Mm-hmm. And I'm working more at really being vulnerable with her. Mm-hmm. Not that I'm generally a pretty vulnerable person, but just like, all right, I'm going to let you in on the inner workings of my mind.
Yeah.
Here's what I'm feeling right now. I don't know what to do with it. But to say it in the place and space that she can hear it, mm-hmm. and it not be received as correction towards her, but I guess what I'm aware of is that that's not something I can just, like, these conversations, the deeper stuff in me, I realize, like, there's a time to share this and there's mm-hmm. a time not to. It's probably not right before we go to bed. Mm-hmm. It's probably not right before, right after I come home from work, she's, working on whatever for the evening. I'm not going to roll in, or right before we're going to school or wherever. Mm-hmm. Hey, can I put you? I'm feeling this right now. Yeah. I need it, because there are things I'm feeling right now, mm-hmm. but it's not time to talk about it yet. And so I'm I'm looking for the right place, even when, interestingly, when I'm in the middle of feeling it, mm-hmm. And I'm trying to think of how I want to talk about this, because it's not terrible. It just, Heather's not, I'll say, okay, let me put it this way. Heather is not a words of affirmation person. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe in talking to Lindsay last week or whatever, somewhere in all of this conversation about marriage, I have realized I want her affirmation more than she may know. Mm-hmm. And I felt like I wanted to tell her that. Mm-hmm. And so we're riding home after church on Saturday night, and I'm just like, man, Lee did a great job. And she's just like kind of sitting there, doing something on her phone or whatever. Yeah. Just not even really listening to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, I want to engage. We're here together. I want to engage with you. Sometimes it feels like you don't like me that much, stuff like that. You want to say, feels like I like you more than you like me. It's those types of things, I think maybe, I don't know if everyone's felt that way in a marriage.
100%. Yes.
It's like, I feel like I'm the one who's more dependent here. You could just go on and be by yourself. But I really need you. I want to be in relationship with you. Mm-hmm. And I'm feeling all of that, like right there in that moment. And it's just like stirring and like emotions and I'm not great with, like, when, I don't know how to, like, what do I do with all this? And so I just start, quietly praying, and I just don't say anything. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm just going to hold off on this. It's not the time. I'm too emotional, like, now. And when I say too emotional, it's not like, sure, tears and screaming and all this. But I wouldn't be able to say it. It's not going to come out the right way, and it's not the right place. She's not even thinking. My guess is that it's just not even on her radar right now. Mm-hmm. But it feels that way to me. It just feels almost like rejection.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah, I think you're talking about wisdom.
Yeah.
Because nobody wants a spouse that's just going to blurt out everything they're thinking in every moment. You're right. The time has to be right. You can really put your spouse in a tough position, like you say, right before you take the kids to school or right before you go to bed or you're walking into something with other people. I think there's definitely, and James says we can pray for wisdom. So if you're having issues with your words in the same way that Whit was talking about praying for a gentle breaking, I think these are all things that we can ask the Lord for. We can say, God, help me in this area of my words. Help me in this area of what's coming out of my heart.
Same night, we got to have a great conversation. It just needed to wait a few minutes. And so I just silently prayed and let myself calm down inwardly, and then wait till the moment was right to just say, hey, there's something I want to share with you. And it was received so beautifully, and it was really on that Saturday night was great for us. It was just what we're discovering now are these sort of mutual exchanges of vulnerability. I think is what we're talking about with words, where it's like cleansing and nourishing this. I got to hear some of Heather's heart on Saturday night about some things that she's processing right now that was so meaningful for me to be able to be a part of. And I told her after, and this is not, I'm not trying to elicit a aw in any way. I wish I would have known how to be a good husband to you so much sooner. I wish I could have. I wish I would have understood how to do this. I just didn't know how to even kind of facilitate. I think that's part of what you're doing as a spouse, is you're facilitating the kind of environment and conditions for the real Heather to show up. The Heather that is not confident in, because that's what you are when you're vulnerable. It's just like, I don't know about this. I don't know if I've got enough, I don't know if I'm somebody. I don't know if I have, I'm enough. And for then you as a spouse to be able to say, to affirm in that moment is deeply, like, huge. I think that's what you're talking about with the word, like cleaning, nourishing, building up some of the stuff you like. That can only really happen in a really intimate way. But to get there, I think that's the part that most of us suck at. Is we just don't know how to get there. So our conversation kind of stays up here, or worse, contentious. And so we don't know how to have kinds of
it's that last
conversations.
I think it was last practical point was learning to speak the other's language.
Yes.
I think that takes time, just like learning any language takes time. It's just like some of it doesn't make sense, and why do you do it that way? And like if you're learning Spanish or French or whatever, it's like, oh, that's different than my language. But you got to learn the different ways that you speak, and I think that's a huge part of it for me. And I've not been good at that with Shannon for many, many years. I feel much like you do. Man, I wish I would have been a decent husband for many, many years, because she deserved that. But on a practical standpoint, because we were talking about some stuff in the content meeting that I thought was really good. And before we move off of this, you said something that I thought was really smart. It was wise. You said sometimes it's just worth saying, what kind of conversation are we having? Remember when you said that?
Well, it was Lindsay that helped me with that. So are we dreaming right now?
And that was my counselor.
So it's just like, are we dreaming?
That's right.
Or are we talking practically? And what that actually led to with me and Heather was me asking her, because she's the kind of person who has a lot of dreams, but struggles to bring those dreams into any kind of practical reality. And I feel like I can help her with that. But I tend to want to move from dreamland to pragmatism too quickly. And I end up shutting down ideas. So we talked about this. So what I'm doing now, and I did it last week, was just like, what are you dreaming about lately? Anything you're dreaming about right now? And it worked. It totally worked. It might have been after the podcast last week.
That's really sweet. I'm like going to tear up. I love that so much.
Well, he said that in the content meeting, and when he said it, something inside of me was like, oh man, what a great question. I would love it if somebody, rather than, if you can be proactive like that, rather than saying, when Heather brings something, you go, are we dreaming? Are we? That's good to do it then.
Yeah,
but if
even
you're
better
before it and say, hey, what are you dreaming about?
Yeah.
Oh, man,
that's
for a
beautiful.
person like me and a person like Heather, probably you're this way.
Yeah.
I got a few things I'm dreaming about. And they're crazy and they're never going to happen. But I
so
want to talk
true.
about them.
That's very
Yes,
true.
you're right.
Yeah.
I think it happened after our recording last Monday. I went home. I think Heather and I were sitting on the back patio, and I was just sharing our conversation, and that Lindsay had shared some things that were just really meaningful for me. It was so good to learn from other people's experience and marriages. And I was like, the dreaming. And so I explained that. And I said, so if you could just let me know, hey, I'm just dreaming right. That would help me so much. Mm-hmm. Then I was like, but I was prompted in the moment. It just dawned on me, but this is not all her responsibility. I could do a better job, I just said, of asking you, are you dreaming about anything right now? So I did. So I said, Heather, are you dreaming about anything right now? And she goes, yeah. She goes, I'm dreaming of putting some fruit trees down the line of our fence line over here. And I was just like, okay. But I knew in that moment that it's not for me. I'm not here now I have no idea if they'll grow or not. I don't know anything about fruit trees. But to even think about the implications of such a thing, just to go, oh, okay, like, what are you thinking? Apple trees? But she was like, yeah, this and that, like a few different ones, and here's what it would do and why I would do it. But then what's cool about it is if you just sit there and be a safe and open space for her. But I don't know if that's a good idea or whatever. I don't have to say that. Yeah. Not that I was thinking it. I can really, truly kind of let go of all my opinions and just be curious for a minute. And then I asked, there was something else she was dreaming about. I can't remember exactly what it is right now, but it was a couple things. It was just sort of, around the house kind of stuff. But stuff she probably wouldn't bring to me. Why? Because she doesn't want to be critiqued right now.
Right, right.
And I think that's what you're talking about.
I get it.
It's me, so it's like
I'm married to and Shannon's not critical at all, but I'm married to Shannon. My best friend is Brian, who's a close friend of both of ours, and then you're my pastor and a dear friend of mine. I have these people in my life that I'm nervous to bring my dreams to not because you guys are mean or critical, but you have this incredible ability, and it is a really powerful ability to go,
that's not going to work.
This part will work, that part won't.
Yes.
And you're right. Like, that's the thing. I know you're right. I just don't want to think about why it won't work yet. I want to think about what could be if it did work. Right? And so just hearing you say, hey, what are you dreaming about right now? I was like, man, what an awesome question. If Shannon, you, Brian asked me, like, that would mean a lot to me. And I'm sure it would mean a lot to people watching this. Like, if you said that to your spouse, if you have... But I'm curious, what would that be in return? What could Heather say to you
that is what I was wondering too?
Because that awakens me. But
what would we ask you? Or what would Heather ask you?
That you'd be like, I want to answer that question. Or,
what's funny is the way that I'm wired up. You know what I'm dreaming about because I'm going to corner you and tell you whether you want to hear it or not.
You're going to hold me down and tell me.
Yeah, I mean, that's my dad. I get it's my dad's the same way. It's like, you're going to hear about what he's into, whether you want to hear about deer or sheep or a hunt or or football or not. You're going to hear it. There was something, oh man, I think it was like Chris Turner. Someone was talking to if you weren't looking for a conversation in the fall, you're going to get a conversation about Lincoln football. Even if you came to him with something else.
Yes.
You'll ask a ministry related question or whatever, and then it's going to turn, Lincoln, and then he's just going to talk to you and he's not going to care whether or not you're into it or not. He's just going to tell you. And I mean, I'm kind of that way. It's just like, I'm just going to share things.
Well, can I guess at something?
Please.
What if Heather had been dreaming about something and she was ready? Does it mean a lot to you for her to come and say, hey, how could I make this happen?
Oh, that would be wonderful.
And then you use your gifts
that would be wonderful.
You'd have to think about this first. You'd have to put this in order. That's not going to work. You wouldn't get the fun. It feels
like you're now respecting me. So that's what I think what I want, is to be valued in that way for what I can do. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have a set of skills, and I'm sure the people in your life do too. And I think what feels like honor and respect is for someone, and what's funny about this? Because it's what Paul is talking about, sacrifice and submission, which we'll get into this next week. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. But these two dynamics, which are so powerful in a relationship, when generally there is one in the relationship, I'm going to call them stronger, but it's like a little bit, and there's this, if you have to kind of take your knives and your needles and your cutting instruments and set them aside and just, with words specifically, and just listen and be there for somebody. But on the other hand, what I want is to be respected.
Right.
And so what I'm looking for, if you would, to me, what you just described demonstrates respect, not just for me, but for my gift and my ability. And that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I like when people ask me questions because I feel useful.
Yeah.
And so, that's a great guess, and it's true.
Yeah, just to say, I think you could help me get this.
Oh man,
done.
I mean, like that's just
what do you see?
Like, I feel great now.
So, as a side note to that, and then you may have other questions, but I would just say to put a punctuation on this conversation, the best thing that has happened in my life, maybe in the last 5 or 6 years, is a true appreciation for these people that are the closest people in my life,
right,
for the ways that they're very, very different. Because for many years, I felt an indictment in some ways, even though they weren't trying to do it, because they were so good at things that I was bad at. And I was just like, why are they so good at that? And I'm so lousy at it. Like, I wish I was more like that. They can do this, they can do that. But they're doing the same thing with me. They're looking at me going, man, Lee's good at this, and I'm not. And I would say just in the last 5 or 6 years with Shannon, with Brian, with you, just the ability to go, man, this isn't a negative. This is a massive positive. This is this huge, I don't have to be like that because I've got Brian and Whit on speed dial to say, hey, I need your brilliance in this area on this. And they're like, happy to give it.
Amazing.
Like there is this, and it's very true with Shannon too. If you can not see your differences in your marriage as just something you got to deal with, just something you got to get over,
right?
But you can say, how has God leveraged this for multiplication, not for addition?
That's so good.
That when we come together, it's just not 1 and 1 is 2, but 1 and 1 is 10, because together.
Wow,
we complete each other. Jerry
Yes,
Maguire.
it's true,
we complete
though.
each other for something better than what we were on our own. And if you can at least just be curious and want to discover how this is a benefit to me that we're different, because it's easy to go, oh, I hate that about her. I hate that about him. I wish they weren't like that. It's easy to do that. It's harder to go, that might be our superpower. That might be the combination, the two chemicals together. That might be the explosive power if you're willing to be curious enough and look for it. I don't know. I just think.
Yeah.
So I think that what you're saying is so true, because husband and wives are like a microcosm of the body of Christ. Like they're this concentrated.
There it is.
Yeah. So in chapter 4, it talks about equipping the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ.
For the building up of the family is essentially so that's what happens in marriage. Husbands and wives building each other up for the building up of the marriage and the family.
Yeah. So in 14 it says, so we may no longer be children tossed to and fro. So there's this maturity thing that's happening, carried about by every wind of doctrine, human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, which you talked about, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and held together by every joint with which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow. So that it builds itself up in love. And so you're talking about, this multiplication idea, that there's growth, there's exponential growth that's possible. And we also have that same growth available to us within the body of Christ. And you're talking about valuing the gifts and the way that God has created other people. And I feel the same exact way around people who have an organizational or administrative gifting. I'm like, you like that? Oh my gosh, I didn't know God made people like you, but I want to be your friend. And I am so thankful that you're a part of the body of Christ, because you're going to make what we're doing together so much better. And so many times we're thinking in terms of well, what am I doing? But it's more about, what are we doing? How are we building up the body of Christ, growing into the fullness of what God has created us to be?
I mean, I think using what we're going to talk about next week, but first sacrifice, which is sacrificing my preferences, desires, will, and so forth for the good of the whole, which in Heather's case means like the way Peter talks about it is, and I'd have to look at it, but how does he describes it, husbands and wives, weaker vessel and all this stuff. It's this idea of though I have power to steamroll you, I'm not going to. I'm going to lay myself down and in sacrificial love, which means in some sense, kind of suppressing myself or my natural, or what I might say, my normal or habitual instincts on a particular thing, to just listen to Heather talk about, like it's not normal for me to say, hey, what you dreaming about right now? Like, I don't think in my whole life I've ever asked another human being that question.
Right.
Because again, I told Heather the other night, it's like my thinking was when we first got married was, if I have a dream or a thought or an idea, something I want to do, I'm going to tell it to you. And my expectation was you would do the same. My expectation was if I'm upset, if you're bothering me, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you straight up right now. And my expectation was you will do the same with me. Not realizing that she's wired up completely differently than me, does not possess the same capacity for words in the way that I use them, is not, able to just vomit out to me clearly what she's thinking or feeling, doesn't even know, but it's down there. And that if I'm not making, so essentially what we had is this kind of the way I envision marriage, which is two independent people sort of in some kind of partnership with one another who function much the same way. But that same doesn't produce the multiplication effort. So it's the same different piece, which has there's a lot of far-reaching implications there. It's part of, I think, the Christian vision of gender and sex and man and wife being in relationship together, not man and man or woman and woman. Yeah. But there's this difference, and it's the distinctiveness and the difference that creates this power and strength, but it requires a certain sacrifice. On the other hand, which you're describing in you coming to me and saying, hey, you've got expertise on this. You know what that is? That's submission.
Yeah.
I'm submitting myself to you. But it becomes, what's so beautiful about it is it becomes so much easier. This is the reason why we don't do it, is because husbands don't sacrifice, wives don't submit. Because we're all kind of holding on our own kingdoms. So it's like I'm trying to break you, bend you to my will, and you just end up with stubbornness and separation. But when when we do this the right way, I'm seeing this in my own marriage right now. It's just the more I make space for her, the more I'm careful and cautious. It's probably not even the right, tender, thoughtful. Yeah. The more she's offering of herself to me and willing to hear, it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, it really is. And there's this intimacy that comes from all of that has been wonderful to experience. Not that we haven't had it at all. Sure. You go through phases of this, and but yeah, I think so. The sacrifice and submission thing, I think, is playing out here with the way we're talking about words.
Yeah, it really is.
As we wrap up today, is there anything that you want people to know about this topic as we go? I want you to have the final word.
I think we've talked about most of the stuff that I valued from the study this week, but I think what Whit and I talked about after Saturday night's service was it would be easy to look at this passage of Scripture and go, man, Paul is really helping us all out. He's given us some great advice on how to have good marriages. And that is here. But I think we might make the mistake of thinking that Ephesians 5, this section 21 through 33, is about marriage, and Paul uses some imagery about Jesus and the church doing it really well to help us out. When really what this is about Jesus and the church and saying, hey, follow that lead. It's not about us, and here's an example of Jesus. It's about Jesus, and here's an example of how we can just, you said it last week, fill in the blank. If you want to know how to do blank, if you want to know that, like, look at Jesus. And I think that's the picture here. And so this is what we would all say at the end of every podcast, but look at Jesus. If you're confused about how to interact with your husband or with your wife, look at Jesus. Have conversations with people you trust about what Jesus would have you do. Model the way you speak, the way you act after what you see in the Gospels around Jesus. And I'm confident you're going to end up in a better place than you are now. Like, even if you're in a good place, you can get to a better place just by saying, because Jesus had this unique ability to speak the truth in love. I mean, in John 1, he was full of grace and full of truth. I always love that. It's not like 50% grace and 50% truth. He's like the fullest measure of both of those things. And that's what gave so much power to what he did, what he said, how he lived. And I think that's what gives you power in your marriage, is to just pattern yourself after what he's doing. Speak the way he spoke, act the way he acted, sacrifice. I mean, even Christ has this beautiful picture of submission, to the Father. That's the Garden of Gethsemane. He's the King of Kings, and he says, I'm going to submit to your will, Father. So I think both of those pictures are great. I don't know. I've enjoyed the study. It's been helpful for me and Shannon. We've had a lot of good conversations, and I would say have conversations. Maybe some of you are not doing that. That would relate to words, but you hear it, you sit in the service, and you go, man, that's really, really good. I have things to work on. I kind of do see a little bit of you in that. That does happen. Be willing to, in the car, on the way home, set the phone down or whatever and say, what did you think of that? And have a conversation. I think it could be really, really helpful. That's why we do these teaching studies.
And one way to do that is this is what spoke to me. This is where I've not been good.
Right.
It's a great way
start
to lead.
With yourself.
If you start with, what did you think?
That's good.
It sounds
good
almost
advice.
like, I mean, it's not wrong to just say, hey, what did you think of that? I think it's great. But if you press too much, it's going to be like, hey, so just take anything away from
that? Just saying, this is where I felt like it hit me or where I was really convicted.
It's good when you're looking out, and I know what experiences. It's good when you're looking out and you make a point and you can see 4 or 5 different places in the room where people go and look at each other. It's like, okay, I touched on something that's happening in their marriage. I think it might have even been that part about letting people finish the sentence on Saturday night. I saw it on my eye. You looked right at Heather.
I did. I leaned over. I'm like, I'm terrible at this.
I was like, okay. He said something hopefully is helpful for my pastor. But anyway, I think that's so much of what we've covered has been kind of where my heart's been. But that's what I would say to finish it up.
Well, thank you so much.
It's been so good. We should have you on every week. It's really fun.
I love it. I love having conversations about this kind of, especially if it's helpful for people that are watching.
I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, cool.